Even brutal dictators need time to unwind. While tyrannical psychopaths have oppressed, starved, exploited, tortured, and killed millions, they've also taken time to watch cartoons, play beach volleyball, and even pen steamy erotica. While normally a hobby helps humanize someone, these hobbies of the brutal dictators on this list only make them more alien and bizarre. Here's what some of the cruelest people in history got up to when they were off the clock. Saddam Hussein wrote steamy romance novels. Former President of Iraq Saddam Hussein was a cold-hearted leader who ruled with an iron fist. The true extent of his atrocities is unknown, as murders carried out at his behest are innumerable, but there is evidence of over 250 mass graves from his reign. In other words, prior to his hanging in 2003, Saddam was not a very chill guy. He was, however, very horny. Saddam had a penchant for writing romance novels. Writing under the heavily encrypted pen name of S. Hussein, Saddam published a book called Zabiba and the King, which was a ham-fisted and very erotic autobiographical novel set in ancient Iraq. The discovery of this sappy, sexually charged tome was also pretty random. CIA officials stumbled across it by chance in an Arabic bookstore in London in 2001. Osama bin Laden loved beach volleyball. Architect of the 9/11 attacks, the worst instance of terrorism ever on American soil, Osama bin Laden knew how to let his hair down and blow off some steam after a long day at Al-Qaeda HQ. But when the 5 o'clock whistle blew, bin Laden didn't dash to the nearest happy hour for wings and tall boys, he hit the sand for an intense match of beach volleyball. The 6 feet 4 inches bin Laden was a force on the court, according to his associate Mohammed Atef. Atef, the former chief of al-Qaeda, also enjoyed the game, but the two never played on the same team, citing the fact that they were so good it was an unfair advantage over other players. Joseph Stalin was thirsty for male nudes. Depending on one's political leanings, Joseph Stalin's legacy is a bit subjective. During his reign 1929 to 1953, the Soviet Union went from a poor, peasant society to an industrial and military superpower, but this also caused the worst man-made famine in history and millions of his people died. Regardless, this legendary figure of collectivism loved nudes. Males' nudes, specifically. Stalin did not, however, draw the nudes himself. He collected sketches of muscular male specimens from various Russian artists and, bizarrely, he merely annotated them. Stalin would draw on the subject's genitals or torsos and write out short messages below them. His scrawls ranged from the humorous, "You need to work, not wank. Time for re-education," to the maudlin, sometimes addressed to his fallen comrades, "Roddick, you ginger bastard, if you hadn't pissed into the wind, if you hadn't been so bad, you'd still be alive." Kim Jong-il was a fanboy for Michael Jordan. Legendary golfer and North Korean dictator Kim Jong-il was something of a human rights violation virtuoso. The ham-shaped leader oversaw plenty of atrocities in his time at the helm in Pyongyang, including ethnic cleansing and mass starvation. But he also adored basketball. His favorite player, naturally, was Michael Jordan, who appeared in the Warner Brothers film Space Jam, which featured several cartoons he also obsessed over like a very normal person. Kim Jong-il was in fact such a fan of his royal airness that he had VHS recordings of every one of Jordan's games. The great leader, sadly, never got to meet his hero, but his son sort of came close with Dennis Rodman's famed trip to North Korea. Adolf Hitler was a Mouseketeer. Perhaps the most evil person to ever walk the earth, a man who attempted the extermination of the Jewish people and as a result claimed over 6 million lives, Adolf Hitler is with exactly 0 redeeming qualities. If anything, his biggest hobby, beyond his extremely mediocre art, just makes him even more grotesque. That's right, he was one of those adults that's really into Disney. In 2008, a Norwegian museum director named William Hackvog found hand-colored cartoons of the characters Bashful and Doc from the 1937 Disney film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The drawings, which were of course pedestrian at best, were signed A.H. and are thought with near certainty to have been done by Hitler, who also owned a copy of the film and thought it was one of the best movies ever made. Before we get into the second half of this video, please remember to like, subscribe and click the notification bell to be the first to check out our latest videos. Idi Amin loved children's cartoons. In 1971, Idi Amin overthrew the Ugandan government and installed himself as leader. During his 8-year reign, he would massacre over 400,000 civilians, often by forcing them to bludgeon one another to death with sledgehammers at the hands of his death squads. In 1979, Amin fled to Saudi Arabia, where he lived the rest of his days in exile, never facing any consequences for his crimes against humanity, before passing away in 2003. But there was another side to Idi Amin. More than a tyrant, more than a madman, Idi Amin was a guy who just loved slapstick comedy. He was apparently an avid fan of children's cartoons, most specifically Tom and Jerry, you know, the one where the larger, menacing figure seeks to destroy the smaller, ostensibly defenseless one. Mao Zedong was a classical poet. Mao Zedong, founder of the People's Republic of China, is technically the greatest mass murderer in history. In 1958, Mao brought forth and ruthlessly enforced the Great Leap Forward, which was a plan to catch China up to the economy of the Western world. Unfortunately, this plan came with mass famine, starvation, torture, and systematic violence, which included making people work nude in the dead of winter, and parents burying their own children alive. All told, 45 million people died during Mao's reign, a body count that remains unmatched by any other historical despot. But the guy just loved poetry. Chairman Mao, though he persecuted many Chinese writers and had countless books burned, was an avid reader, as well as a bit of a writer. He wrote over 30 poems, usually in the format of the ancient Chinese style. Ironically, he would have forbidden 1 billion people from ever reading his work, due to his principles, but who isn't self-conscious about their poetry? Benito Mussolini penned bad erotica. In 1919, Benito Mussolini founded Italy's Fascist Party, a new faction which broke away from socialist ideals and promoted nationalism and extreme right-wing policies. By 1925, he was the nation's dictator and effectively the sole ruler. Along with his buddies, Adolf Hitler and Francisco Franco, Mussolini was part of a legendary triumvirate of shish * the ads that were basically a living, breathing newspaper comments section of racist uncles. The end of World War II was not kind to that trio, however, and in 1945, Mussolini was captured by Italian partisans and killed, along with his mistress Claretta Petacci, by firing squad. A few bullets to the skull, however, were not all that Claretta and Benito shared. He also wrote her a ton of insanely sexual letters, which were unearthed in 2009. Mussolini, who was barely 5 feet tall, was incredibly confident when it came to sending thirsty messages. He had no qualms shooting out erotic passages like, "I tremble in telling you, but I have a feverish desire for your delicious little body which I want to kiss all over. And you must adore my body, you're giant." There really isn't much subtlety with fascism. Imelda Marcos had a ridiculous shoe fetish. Imelda Marcos is the widow of Ferdinand Marcos, the former dictator and president of the Philippines 1966 to 1986. Ferdinand had a pretty dark start in politics. In 1935 he was found guilty of assassinating his father's campaign rival for National Assembly, but he was later acquitted and rose all the way up to the presidency, where his authoritarian regime was known for corruption and lavish spending. Imelda Marcos received an official position in her husband's regime, one that allowed her to hook up her friends and relatives with lucrative government positions. Imelda herself was also severely in on the take, acquiring over 1,200 pairs of shoes, all of which she had to leave behind when the Filipino people rose up in 1986, forcing her and Ferdinand to flee to an actually pretty cushy exile in Hawaii. Francisco Franco loved to paint nature scenes. After successfully overthrowing the government during the Spanish Civil War, Francisco Franco installed a brutal military dictatorship which saw tens of thousands imprisoned or executed during his regime. Known as El Caudillo, which translates to the leader. Franco also banned the Basque and Catalan languages, along with every religion besides Catholicism. But when he wasn't having his secret police apprehend civilians, or maybe while he was, Franco was a fan of painting outdoor scenes on canvas. The paintings, which his own grandson will tell you, were not great works of art, were of course done in the vein of realism, because getting nuanced work from a military dictator is probably a bridge too far. Which of these hobbies of brutal dictator were you most surprised about? Let us know in the comment section.